If you see a question that you really like, please be sure to like it, as the top liked questions will be the ones chosen for our Q&A session. Here is a quick look at our agenda for today. Our experts will take over and provide an overview of the isotope supply chain from production and processing to application and delivery, and also highlight the diverse career paths and opportunities across both the nuclear and healthcare sectors. Here I'd like to start with a short introduction about the NAYGN Durham chapter. Created in 2008, the NAYGN Durham chapter provides opportunities for a young generation of nuclear enthusiasts in Durham region to develop strong leadership and professional skills, create lifelong connections, engage and inform the public, and inspires today's nuclear technology professionals to meet the challenges of the 21st century. I would also like to highlight the incredible achievements of our chapter, having won Best NAYGN Chapter in 2024 and 2025, and also the Best Professional Development Team in 2025 across the continent. NAYGN Durham chapter acknowledges that Durham region and the surrounding area is home to the Indigenous peoples from across the territory and country. I'd like to recognize that we are gathered in the shared traditional and treaty territory of the Chippewas and Mississaugas Anishinaabe, also known as the Williams Treaties First Nations. To acknowledge the traditional territories is to recognize its history, predating the establishment of the earliest European colonies. It is also to acknowledge the significance for the Indigenous peoples who lived and continue to live upon it, to acknowledge the people whose practices and spiritualities were tied to the land and water and continue to develop in relation to the territory. It is important that we take time to acknowledge the treaties and territories, as it is a reminder that the privileges and benefits we enjoy as citizens of Ontario are rooted in the long-standing treaties and historical relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. For our safety pre-job brief, please take time to review your working location, whether you are in office or working from home, and be aware of your fire emergency procedures, including the nearest emergency exits and exit strategies. And in the case of a medical emergency, call 911 and/or your local authorities. I will now introduce our wonderful speakers for today. Starting off with Paul Peary, the Director of Economic Development at the Municipality of Clarington and Working Group Co-Chair at CEOIA. Paul is an experienced business development professional with history of working in the government administration industry. Up next, we have Lisa Taylor, who is the Director of Isotope Strategy and Business Development at Laurentis Energy Partners and Working Group Co-Chair at CEOIA. Before LEP, Lisa spent 24 years in the pharmaceutical industry in a variety of business development and marketing roles. Lisa has also worked at Bayer Canada for 15 years. During the period of 2013 to 2023, Lisa was dedicated to radium-223 dichloride, facilitating the setup of over 50 programs at nuclear medicine departments across Canada, and shaped the marketing strategy and commercial tactical plan. Up next, we have Richard Wiens, who is the Director of Business Development and Strategic Supply at NAYGN. Richard is focused on developing and implementing long-term strategies for maintaining a reliable supply of cobalt-60 from reactors around the world. Up next, we have Wilson Yu, who is the Manager of Diagnostic Services Business Operations at Oak Valley Health. He is an experienced healthcare leader with over 15 years of experience leading and building teams in private healthcare, large community organizations, and national academic centers in Canada. Wilson's work focuses on molecular imaging, magnetic resonance imaging, and enterprise clinical informatics. Our last speaker for today is Amanda Tiber, who is the Manager of Strategic Initiatives at the Canadian Nuclear Isotope Council, which is an independent, not-for-profit advocacy and member services organization. In her role, Amanda leads strategic initiatives, advancing government advocacy, public policy, stakeholder engagement, and educational initiatives that strengthen collaboration across industry, academia, and government. I will now pass it over to Amanda to share her slides, and also to Paul to give an overview of the CEOIA.
Just want to confirm that everyone can see the slides okay? Fantastic. Over to you, Paul.
Thanks, Amanda. So thanks again, everyone, for joining today. My name is Paul Peary. I'm the Director of Economic Development for the Municipality of Clarington. I will flag that I'm surrounded with a lot of great people who are much smarter and more knowledgeable about the isotope sector than I am. So the CEIOA was founded by the municipality of Clarington and Laurentis, as well as a few consultants in 2023. We are a group of municipalities, industry professionals, post-secondary institutions, as well as medical institutions, working from Clarington to Ottawa to support the isotope sector in central and eastern Ontario. We work in collaboration with CNIC, as well as other groups like ours, including CEOIA. Our mission really is to unite, enhance, support, increase the awareness of isotopes, and facilitate and strengthen the sector. So when it comes to isotopes, I think a lot of the people attending today know very well what they are. They know about nuclear energy. But for a lot of individuals who live their day lives, they don't have many interactions with us. We're seeing more and more how these critical materials are being developed into life-saving technologies and other uses in the medical field. And from our perspective, we need to get the word out to help inform and educate individuals about the sector. As it relates to the group here today, one of our priorities is to help with the talent pipeline. And so we are looking to engage students and schools for strategic projects, establish mentorship opportunities with young professionals, and continue to collaborate with other great programs such as yours. And we're hoping that this will result in more professional development opportunities, strengthening of connections between academia and industry, increasing interest and knowledge in the isotope-related fields, and creating a strong pipeline of talent for the industry. As we know, there's a lot of great things happening in the province as it relates to nuclear and isotopes. One of the bigger challenges we're going to see over the next 20, 25 years is ensuring that we have a very strong workforce. So the more people we can tell about the great work that's being done here in the sector, hopefully we can have more great minds joining it.
All right, getting myself off mute. Hello, everyone, and so happy that you wanted to spend your lunch with us to learn more about the isotope sector. My name's Lisa Taylor, and as you can see, I work for Laurentis Energy Partners. I'm going to talk a bit about medical isotopes, what we're doing, which is very exciting at Laurentis Energy Partners as a key irradiator in the isotope supply chain. But I'm actually also going to start with a little bit of a level setting, just to make sure everyone understands from the start what a medical isotope is and go from there. So essentially, radioisotopes are nuclei with extra energy that is emitted to become stable. And when isotopes are used in a medical context, we simply refer to them as medical isotopes. And you can see here the ionizing radiation can be emitted as gamma, beta, or alpha emitters. And so there are a lot of exciting innovations in the radiopharmaceutical industry using medical isotopes in exciting different ways. Next slide. So big picture, medical isotopes can be used either to diagnose or image on the one hand, or to treat diseases such as cancer. So you can see just in this simple schematic, beyond producing the medical isotope, first step needs to be introduced into the body. And here you're seeing it as an infusion, and nuclear medicine departments, really, you'll hear more from Wilson, are the specialty in the department in a hospital setting that has the expertise in what's called unsealed sources of medical isotopes. So if we're thinking in a nuclear medicine context, you first need to introduce that isotope into the body. That isotope will accumulate in the body as appropriate to either, on the one hand, image or diagnose, or on the other hand, to treat through therapies. So you can see from an imaging perspective, the emitted radiation is used to visualize the area of interest in the body. and as a therapy, if it accumulates, if in the example of cancer, delivers sort of that radioactive payload to kill the cancer cells. So on the we have also a lot of synonyms and terminologies. We talk about radioligand therapy, which is an exciting area of medicine right now, often called the fourth pillar of cancer care, to very effectively as an alternative to other therapies like chemotherapy to treat various cancers. Next slide. So medical isotopes have historically been used for diagnostic purposes. That is sort of the foundation, if you will, in nuclear medicine usage. But there has been a real exciting surge in the last few decades of isotopes used in a therapeutic context. And you can see from the bar chart on the right-hand side of your screen that that is in fact driving the exponential growth in demand for medical isotopes around the world. You can see that if we look at the bar chart again, growing in 2024 from about 11.2 billion to 41 billion in just a decade. So with that, those of us in the Central Eastern Ontario region play a vital role to sort of serving this market and ensuring that there are enough medical isotopes to support this exponential growth in demand. The second point you can see here is just in terms of regional usage of medical isotopes, really North America, with the US being a primary driver, accounts for close to half of medical isotopes usage, followed by Europe and then Asia Pacific. But what's very clear is there's just phenomenal growth ahead of us in the next decade. Next slide. So here you can see the radioisotope supply chain, and I'll take you through this relatively quickly. It all starts with target enrichment to ensure that you have that starting material in relative abundance. The next step in the supply chain, which is in fact where Laurentis is operating as an irradiator at the Darlington OPG facility, is irradiation. So the production of the isotope happens in either nuclear reactors, cyclotrons, or linear accelerators. And of course, with Laurentis at the OPG facility, we are making it at the reactor. And think of that step as producing the raw isotope. The next step after that is creating what's called the active pharmaceutical ingredient, which is a processing and purification step. Anything, whether it's radioactive or a standard drug, the health regulators require that everything be then produced under what's called good manufacturing practices. That's a standard for anything entering the human body. So that very important next step is to ensure that it's pharmaceutical grade active pharmaceutical ingredient. And following that step is a step called finished product manufacturing. Some isotopes like Y90 are actually a sort of a standalone isotope used, for example, in the treatment of liver cancer. That's what Y90 does. It's a standalone isotope. Others, like lutetium PSMA, that finished product manufacturing step is important because it's binding that lutetium isotope to a protein or small molecule, which creates that finished product. And that's typically happening at the manufacturing facility of a pharmaceutical company itself, or a designated contract manufacturing organization, or CDMO for short. And from there, the company will either distribute directly to all the hospitals and patients around the world, or through an intermediary radiopharmacy to distribute and supply. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, the supply chain that we operate in. And as you can imagine, and sorry, Amanda, there a little quick there, but it's a very intensive and time-sensitive supply chain. Think of it as making and distributing melting ice cubes, given the radioactive decay properties of these products. So from there, we've talked about the exponential demand that's ahead of us. We have traditionally had the research reactors, or a network around the world, that are producing medical isotopes. And research reactors are exclusively focused on that medical isotope research on the one hand and production. But that network alone, when you look at that exponential growth, isn't really enough to serve the market on its own. So at Laurentis, working at the OPG facility with our isotope production system, we are one of now several power reactors that are producing isotopes. And that value proposition we'll talk more about, but we really offer the reliability and scale to support that exponential growth and demand of isotopes. Next slide. So at Darlington, we have CANDU reactors, which are thermal neutron reactors that are cooled and moderated using heavy water, that use natural uranium as a fuel supply. And at essentially the four reactors at Darlington, we produce essentially 20% of Ontario's electrical supply. And then from a reliability perspective, our operations have garnered numerous awards, and we have ahead of us sort of 30 or more years of stable operations. So just sort of to seed that idea with the CANDU reactors at Darlington, and why our system there on those CANDU reactors are so important to generating medical isotopes. Next slide. So we get into our target delivery system, which is what we call our isotope production system. We are partnered in these systems with BWXT Medical. They kind of sort of conceived of the design, engineered, and installed what we're calling TDS Unit 2. So we've got one system installed on Unit 2 at Darlington. And we have a second system that is actually in installation now and will be going online in approximately 2027. So we will have two of these target delivery systems. They are a first of a kind technology, which allows us to be one of North America's largest irradiation systems, operating with really unparalleled scale and capacity for medical isotope production, producing at high yields. And it's sort of a key proposition sort of relative to these research reactors is we have stable high flux reactors, and anywhere that you stick the isotopes for radiation in our core, we are offering stable flux. And that is really important relative to the research reactors, which have high flux and low flux regions, so sort of more variable flux. And importantly, from that reliability perspective, which, as you can imagine, is really important for serving the medical community, we are harvesting our medical isotopes while the reactor is online. So individual systems will run for 30 to 40 months. In contrast to, let's say, the BR2 reactor in Belgium, they are also producing medical isotopes, and they are up for 3 weeks and then down for 1 week to refuel. And in that time, obviously not able to make medical isotopes. And finally, just as our system is fully automated and actively cooled, which is obviously important for safe and reliable operations. Next slide. So here's a schematic of first actually a visual image on the one side of our system, and then you can see sort of in profile a schematic, which I'll just go through very quickly to say we again talked about it being an automated system. We have an operator at that target loader position that is inserting our targets. It'll go through this airlock, and you can follow the arrows to see the travel path that the targets follow. We have 4 different what's called elevators or target elevators that we insert our targets into the core for irradiation. And you can see the fuel rods that are in, and I see if my mouse will show here, sort of showing the in-core irradiation section, which is where our fuel rods are actually in a horizontal position, rather than the research reactors, which are in a vertical position. And that's essentially why anywhere that you vertically place the targets in our system, we have that stable flux for irradiation of the medical isotopes. Next slide. And in terms of what we're producing at our system at Darlington, we're currently commissioned and able to make Moly-99, Y-90, and Lutetium-177. Moly decays into technetium-99, which is actually the most used isotope in the world for diagnostic imaging purposes. Y-90 is used for liver cancer treatment, and we are partnered with Boston Scientific to produce their Y90 TheraSpheres. And finally, lutetium-177, which is bound to proteins called PSMA 617, which currently is used in both prostate cancer and neuroendocrine tumor therapies. So we are, beyond these, always exploring other isotopes that we can produce in our reactor. And it's a really exciting time in the field, as there's a lot of exciting research and development happening with new up-and-coming isotopes. So that's sort of an overview of what we're doing at Laurentis. And I think this is my last slide. I will pass it off to the next speaker.
Who is me? So good afternoon, I guess, everybody. I'm Richard Wiens. Administrative point, I injured my hand yesterday and I need to keep it elevated. So this does not signify boredom or sleepiness. I just need to keep my hand up. And it's a bit more natural than sitting here like this. So next slide, please, Amanda. So as mentioned, I'm from Nordion. Nordion's located in Ottawa, so kind of the eastern part of the catchment area for the CEOIA. But there is actually a really interesting little, or big, depending on how you look at it, medical isotopes supercluster there. So us, BWXT, who Lisa mentioned, Boston Scientific, who are the owners of the TheraSphere, and Best Medical, who produces devices for cancer treatment and actually cyclotrons for medical isotope production. So an interesting, not very well-known little group of companies in Ottawa. And in the context of this conversation, of course, we're always interested in talking to people who are studying or earlier in their careers in terms of opportunities to come and participate in this really, really cool space. We've actually, Nordion's been around we're celebrating our 80th year this year. We've been around since 1946 in a variety of kind of instantiations and with a variety of products. Today, we produce a single isotope, which is cobalt-60. And it has some overlap to what Lisa previously talked about in terms of a therapeutic isotope. But it also has an interesting kind of industrial application. So let me start there. And we use this isotope to primarily to sterilize single-use medical devices. So if you think about a drape or a gown or a glove or a bunch of the things that I saw last night when I was in the ER, being sterile and opened from like a blister pack and then used and then thrown out. Those things all need to be sterilized, as you can imagine, and globally, about 30% of those medical devices are sterilized with gamma radiation from cobalt-60, and a big chunk of that comes from the province of Ontario. I'll talk about that in a bit in the next slide. In the US, this is about 40%, and they are the predominant producer of single-use medical devices. Globally, so they use a fair bit of about 50% of the global supply of cobalt-60, and in the U.S. that 40% translates, just to give you a scale, translates into about 16 billion devices a year. Billion with a B in the U.S. alone are sterilized with cobalt-60. So it's very, very critical. We make the argument, it's not overstated to say that without cobalt-60 you would not have modern healthcare today. Because it's so critical to sterilization. If you go over to the right-hand side, this is the kind of the overlap application into the true medical isotope space, which is where we use a different form of cobalt-60 for the treatment of various diseases, primarily brain cancer, but also some other diseases of the head and neck, and that, as well as breast cancer with a relatively new application. So in this case, probably something around 80,000 patients a year globally, again, are treated. In both the industrial and the medical applications, Ontario and Nordion are truly are world leaders. So we're really the only folks who are able to ship pretty much anywhere in the world. And we have such a great, stable, reliable supply of cobalt-60 that we're really a leader in both of those spaces. And then the last thing that we do here is we actually design, install, fabricate, commission, maintain large-scale industrial irradiation systems. So these are the actual facilities that would use cobalt-60 to sterilize single-use medical devices. There are about 300 of those around the world, and we built about 125 or 130 of those, and we continue to build those at a rate of not many, but one or two a year. So people are continuing to invest in cobalt. So Amanda, if you could go to the next slide. I'll just talk about the production process. Again, very similar to the one that that Lisa described. You might recall that she talked about unsealed sources. Our whole business is around sealed sources. So this is basically cobalt-60 as the isotope in cans, if you want to think of it very simply. So we start with a thing called a slug, which is a little cylinder that's about 25 millimeters long and 5 millimeters in diameter, or an inch by a quarter of an inch. High purity cobalt-59. You find that wherever you mine gold and silver and nickel and copper and a bunch of other things. We sinter that into this slug and nickel plate it so that because it's quite friable when it's sintered and you don't want things to chip off when you're handling them. We take that those cobalt slugs and we put them in a zircaloy tube. So those of you who know about reactor design and reactor physics recognize zircaloy as a material that's used quite often because it's neutronically very transparent, right? The neutrons go through it and they don't generally get absorbed. Same principle as Lisa previously described, that cobalt-59 gets turned into cobalt-60. I should back up. We take about 8 of those slugs and we put them in a zircaloy tube. We arrange them in those things that are called bundle frames there. We string those together in a kind of a shish kebab arrangement, and we put those into the reactor. In Canada, we produce at all four of the B-side Bruce reactors, and in 3 of the Pickering reactors, and now in 2, we're actually irradiating targets in 2 of the Darlington reactors. So this was around the same time that the TDS was being installed. We were installing equipment to be able to produce cobalt at all 4 of those Darlington reactors, which will have a significant impact on the global supply when that's all said and done. So we leave those cobalt adjusters in there. Those adjusters would normally be made of stainless steel for reaction control and basically xenon transient overrides and things like that, if you know about reactor design. And we just replace the stainless steel with the equivalent, kind of the neutronically equivalent amount of cobalt-59 that absorbs neutrons during the course of operation of the reactor over a life cycle. When the reactor is shut down for maintenance, regular maintenance, which now happens in most CANDUs, certainly the Canadian one, somewhere between 30 and 36 months. We take that cobalt-60 out. That picture there with the blue glow with the Cherenkov is actually a fresh set of adjusters that came out of a Bruce reactor. We break that back down to the bundle assembly form. We put it in a very specialized transport package. You can see a version of that over to the right there. And we send it to our facility in Ottawa, where we unload it in a pool and we pull it up into what we think is a unique set of hot cells, 6 large capacity hot cells in our processing facility. We basically take apart the target down to the slug level. We take 16 of those slugs from various places and we put them in a stainless steel capsule, and then we over-encapsulate that in a secondary capsule. So we end up with this thing called a C188 double encapsulated sealed source, again, as opposed to an unsealed source. And that's the secret sauce really that gets shipped around the world. Again, the transport package on the right-hand side there, that is about 12,000 pounds of mostly lead and steel. The cavity that is in the middle of that actually holds the cobalt-60 is relatively small, and the weight of the cobalt-60 pales in comparison, obviously, to the weight of the package. One of the competitive differentiators we have, and that sort of separates Nordion from the other providers of cobalt-60 around the world, is the size of our transport package fleet. So we have about 200 of those containers, about 80 of the big ones that ship cobalt from the reactors to Nordion, and they're licensed for 400,000 curies. And we have about 120 of the smaller ones, which are only licensed for 200,000 curies. And those are the ones that get shipped to customers around the world. We've shipped to about 40 different countries. We routinely ship to 15 or 20 countries every year. So that's kind of a picture of how cobalt is produced. And you will find this similar kind of supply chain around the world. There's 4 other countries, 5 in total, that produce cobalt-60. It all looks pretty much similar to this. But again, in terms of the actual scale and capacity that we have to produce cobalt-60, Canada and Ontario and Ottawa and Nordion specifically definitely have the lion's share of that production. So that is it for me, and I think I'm passing it to Wilson.
Thank you, Richard. So you've heard a lot about the technical aspects of medical isotopes. You've heard about how they're produced, all the technical things that comes from actually making these medical isotopes. So I'm here to talk about when you actually get to the healthcare portion of it. How does it actually get to the patient? And what do we do when you're using these medical isotopes in the hospital? So next slide. So as you've heard, Canada is actually a global leader in medical isotope production, Ontario specifically, numerous places in Ontario that are currently producing medical isotopes, and many more that will be popping up soon. And as we get regulatory approval for more medical isotopes to be produced at all of our different power plants, I think that'll just keep expanding. But when we're looking at how we use nuclear energy in traditional healthcare, what we're talking about most likely is molecular imaging, which is what we're most familiar with. So when we're talking about molecular imaging, we're talking about nuclear medicine, PET-CT, PET-MR, as Lisa talked about earlier, where we're injecting a radioisotope. So that is a medical isotope that's tagged to a pharmaceutical, a specific pharmaceutical. So together, we'll call it a radiopharmaceutical. We inject it into a patient. Depending on what that pharmaceutical is, it'll go to specific areas of the body. For example, bones, hearts, brains, whatever it is, and they'll show up as hotspots. So in that picture down there, you can see there are certain areas of the body that show up specifically brighter. So in one of those pictures, you'll see that the heart shows up specifically brighter. And what that does for our radiologists and for our patients is it shows up, it brings up where we're seeing higher metabolic activity. So when you think about it, cancer cells are very highly metabolically active for the most part. So when we inject something into a patient's body, that cancer cell or those cancer cells are going to be trying to take up more of that radiopharmaceutical compared to regular tissue that's surrounding it. So that's how we identify hotspots in molecular imaging. So you can take that and then go on to further imaging as you need, or maybe you'll biopsy that specific tissue. But traditional molecular imaging is really based upon what we're seeing in terms of your body's metabolic function. So from nuclear medicine, which has traditionally been gamma radiation, we've moved on to PET, so PET-CT and PET-MR. So PET stands for positron emission tomography. So we're using a different sort of radiopharmaceutical. So instead of the traditional technetium-based radiopharmaceuticals that we've used in nuclear medicine, in PET we're using positron emitters. So most commonly for positron emitters, we're using something called FDG, which is, you can think of it as a radioactive sugar. So when we're injecting radioactive sugar into a patient's body, similarly, same thing, when there are highly metabolic tissues, such as cancer cells, they need more sugar. So they will preferentially take up more of that FDG and it will show up as a hotspot. So something interesting with molecular imaging is that we have the capability to combine nuclear medicine and PET imaging with CT and MR imaging. So you'll see that in that image, there is a CT image that is kind of superimposed on top of the, say, PET image. And in that way, we are able to get the best of both worlds. So we get that metabolic activity, where are those hotspots, but also that anatomic accuracy. So that's basically molecular imaging in a nutshell. But the other usage of medical isotopes, once again, touched upon earlier, is radioligand therapy. So historically, when we're thinking about radioligand therapy, what this is in a very similar fashion, we're injecting some sort of radioactive isotope into a patient and it's being uptaken by a specific tissue. So historically, we've used radioactive iodine to treat thyroid cancers. But as we start to develop and test out new medical isotopes that are being developed, we are discovering other things that we could use for radioligand therapy. So one of those things is lutetium that is tagged to PSMA, which is a prostate-specific membrane antigen, so specifically targeting prostate cancer. And then the last thing that is the hot word of the day for molecular imaging and radioligand therapy is theranostics. So theranostics, you can think of it as a combination of the imaging portion, the therapy portion, and targeted medicine. So theranostics is, in a nutshell, you are still injecting a radioactive isotope, a medical isotope, into a patient's body. It will have the dual function of bringing radiation to those targeted cancer cells, but also you can still use that injected radiation for your imaging. So instead of just imaging and then going through therapy, you're imaging and having therapy at the same time. So that is the biggest thing that's been happening in the molecular imaging and radioligand therapy world right now. The biggest molecule that we've used in the last 2 or so years is the radioactive lutetium, which is tagged to the PSMA. But there are many other things that I believe that are in development, and we could see an explosion of interest in theranostics so that we're treating and imaging at the same time. Next slide. So how do you get into healthcare using nuclear energy? So in Ontario specifically, people who handle and will be performing the imaging are medical radiation technologists, so part of the medical radiation sciences stream. In Ontario, there are multiple designations. So as you can see, there are radiology designations, radiation therapy designations, magnetic resonance, and then DMS is our diagnostic medical sonographers. But what separates all of them is how it is that they're using radiation, so medical radiation. What I want to highlight is nuclear medicine. So in Ontario, it would be medical radiation technologist designation nuclear medicine. So these are the technologists that will be operating the systems. They'll be injecting those radioisotopes. They'll be acquiring the images. If there's any sort of radioligand therapy, they will be assisting the radiologists in supplying that therapy and dealing with all patient care within the hospital system. You can see there's some pictures on the side there. So that one picture is from the Lakeridge Health team in Oshawa. That is them celebrating the 1-year anniversary of their PET CT. So if you didn't know, in 2024, we had launched the first PET CT in Durham region. So that kind of bridged the gap between, say, Sunnybrook, Toronto, and Ottawa. So all our patients in Durham region are now able to go to Lakeridge in Oshawa for their PET CT services. And they're currently looking to see if they can expand the different indications they're able to offer at Lakeridge, in addition to starting a radioligand therapy program for lutetium as well. So in terms of schools, if anyone was ever interested in schools that you could get through to get your medical radiation technologist license, the Michener Institute at UHN in Toronto is one of the big ones in Ontario. We also have SAIT in Alberta, BCIT in British Columbia. Mohawk College is a relatively new one for nuclear medicine, but there are numerous other accredited educational facilities across Canada that will be producing nuclear medicine technologists. And I think this is something that will continue to grow in the next few years as the healthcare shortage for nuclear medicine techs is kind of expanding because people are retiring, but not enough people are entering the programs to replace all of these retirees, not to mention just to try and fill all of these new positions that are being created because there's so many new PET centers across Ontario, so many new developments in theranostics and radioligand therapy. So if anyone was ever interested, you can reach out to me or you can reach out to any of those schools, and then we can kind of guide you in that pathway. And that's it.
Thank you, Wilson. I think I am up next. So we've heard a lot from folks today on there's a lot of growth and a lot of things happening and momentum. But my slides here are going to dive into what does that growth look like and see some of the data and statistics around that. So as Shima mentioned, I am from the Canadian Nuclear Isotope Council. So we are an independent, non-for-profit advocacy and member services organization. We support over 120 members across Canada. Both some of the folks on this call today are also members. So we have members from science, academia, healthcare, and nuclear sector organizations as well. So our vision is really to help drive and strengthen a thriving Canadian isotope sector through innovation and leadership. And some of the things that we do is also take a look at what's coming down the pipeline and future innovation as well, and advocating to make sure that Canada has all the tools in the toolbox to have a strong and strengthened isotope ecosystem. So as I mentioned, we heard today that there's a lot happening, and we've seen this diagram from Lisa's chart as well, so we can dive a little bit deeper. But as we're seeing, the Canadian isotope ecosystem is doing a lot of work in increasing production. And that's to support this global demand that we're noticing, especially in the nuclear medicine market. So as Elisa kind of mentioned before, it's expected to go up to 41 to 43 billion by 2033 for a nuclear medicine market, which is a huge jump when we look at it from when it was valued at 2023 at 9 billion. As we note, North America is continuing to emerge as one of the largest market regions for this growth. Now that's due to our sophisticated supply chain here in Canada, our commercial power reactors, so our CANDU reactors that Lisa mentioned, kind of producing isotopes at an unmatched scale, our sophisticated network of cyclotrons and accelerators, which Wilson kindly touched on from more of the healthcare side. And also just the expertise and long history that Canada has here as well. When we look at what's making up and driving a lot of this cost, Wilson really touched upon this as well, where it's a lot of the therapeutics and radiotheranostics. So we took a look at some of the clinical trials that are coming down the pipeline and seeing what are some of the standout isotopes. And as Wilson also mentioned, lutetium-177, which is commonly used for prostate cancer for radiotheranostics, seems to be leading the charge, as well as other isotopes such as yttrium-90, which Laurentis is working on, and other rare isotopes such as actinium-225. So based on all of this, the CNIC noticed there is a huge significant opportunity for Canada to play a major role in global isotope innovation and production, and really seize the opportunity of this global demand. So based on that, back in 2023 in March, the CNIC launched what's called our Isotopes for Hope campaign. This campaign was to really set out an ambitious goal of expanding and doubling Canada's isotope production by 2030 to meet this growing demand. We also envision expanding our leadership in the development, supply, use, and overall awareness of medical isotopes and the critical role that they play. We've seen significant growth and momentum with this campaign. So if folks weren't aware, the Ontario government last year committed to this goal to double Ontario's production of medical isotopes by 20 and establish what's called the Nuclear Isotope Innovation Council of Ontario. And we've also seen great momentum from a federal level, also committing to this goal. So what's next? What can we keep our eyes on? What are some of the things that are happening coming down this pipeline? So as I mentioned, the federal government has also taken great note into our isotope industry and very recently announced the development of a comprehensive radioisotope strategy. So this was a part of the nuclear energy strategy that Natural Resources Canada recently put out a few weeks ago. So this marked a major opportunity for not only Canada's nuclear sector, but isotope sector as well, and really maximizing the potential of our supply chain, leveraging new and existing infrastructure, exploring ways to kind of capitalize on our historical leadership in both our nuclear fleet and expertise, as well as our isotope leadership as well. And among this, we're also seeing the Canada's government commit to growing our global medical isotope market by at least 10%, and supporting that through the growth of our radiopharmaceutical supply chain and highly skilled talent pipeline to support this growth. So as we mentioned today, we're seeing great momentum in this as well. Our CANDU refurbishments had recent milestones of being under budget, under time, which is kind of carrying our isotope leadership well into the next generation, into the 2060s. And with this emergence, we're seeing regional groups pop up to kind of support this innovation. And that's simply how, the Central and Eastern Ontario Isotope Alliance, as well as CEOIA, has also emerged through this as well. So I wanted to leave on a note before we kind of go into any Q&As on how to kind of stay in the loop on some of the things that we've mentioned here today, learning more about the regional excellence of the CEOIA as well. So the first link here is to our website. This is for the Central and Eastern Ontario Isotope Alliance. You can learn more about the members that make this alliance, as well as websites to both Lisa and Paul's and Richard's and Wilson's companies as well. And then the second barcode here is for the Canadian Nuclear Isotope Council's newsletter. So stay up to date with not only events and opportunities that we put on for networking opportunities for NAYGN folks as well, but also keep up to date on advocacy news such as the radioisotope development strategy, news from around the world, and we also post isotope careers. So to save some time, maybe I'll stop sharing my screen there and I will go back to Shima and folks to leave some time for Q&A.
Can we get a round of applause for our amazing speakers? Thank you to all the speakers for your time and informing us more about the nuclear isotopes. Now we'll move into the Q&A portion of our webinar. I'll read out the questions submitted by the audience, and any of our speakers can jump in to respond. So for our first question, how do we ensure that each batch of the isotopes meet purity and quality requirements for medical use? Anybody can answer.
I guess I can start, and then Richard might want to layer on. But from a Laurentis perspective, as an irradiator, using a working power reactor, and in fact the research reactors as well, we aren't required to follow the quality rules, which I described in my presentation as GMP. At the stage of irradiation, it's that next step up in the purification processing step, where the ampules, the contents that have the isotopes are actually manipulated and done in under what's called GMP conditions in typically what's called a hot cell, because they're too radioactive for the operators to directly interact with. It's at that point in the supply chain is the start of that GMP requirement. And here in Canada, we obviously have Health Canada. Any facility that is operating under GMP conditions will be audited by the health regulator, and have a lot of internal SOPs and training of the employees to be compliant. And then, of course, have test specifications to test and confirm that the product is at the purity, radioactivity, and things like sterility are important at that point too. So I'll pass it off to Richard to maybe add on.
Yeah, I would say just generically, what you end up doing is validating a process. You have a production process, you end up validating it and documenting it, and then you have to prove to the regulators that you're actually following the process, right? And then you'll have spots along the way where you're taking measurements, but it actually is one of the bigger challenges at scale. So particularly not so much with kind of isotopes like cobalt-60 that are produced for years and years and years and years, or moly, or any of those kind of long-standing isotopes, but the newer ones. One of the things you'll find is people will do a lot of work around inventing new ways to produce those isotopes, and they can do it on a benchtop in a laboratory environment. But then when you scale, one of the things that people often find is it's very, very difficult to maintain quality at scale. So.
Thank you so much, Lisa and Richard. Our next question is, what have been the biggest lessons learned since starting production at OPG?
That is a good question. And as a non-operational person, I'm going to have to think about that a bit. I think, for our various customers that we're irradiating for, given the short half-life, the kind of melting ice cube dynamic, everything that's done from a timeline perspective is ultimately to serve the patients that Wilson is seeing in a hospital setting. So the communication, collaboration, and sort of setting the critical path timelines, that's really ultimately driven by our customer who's taking those isotopes further in the supply chain. Everything backs up from hospital treatment dates on backwards. So I think for us as the irradiator at that earlier part of the supply chain, everything kind of comes from our customers further up the supply chain, and so that project management, collaboration, defining timelines is really, really important to then be able to serve the patients that require these isotopes.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Our next question is, what isotopes are of primary need for medical purposes but challenged due to limited availability? How to best overcome it?
I can take a stab at that, even though we're not involved in the production of short-lived isotopes at the moment. But there is an up and coming isotope called actinium-225, which is seen as sort of there's a huge amount of debate, but some people will call it a better lutetium. It's actually an alpha emitter, not a beta emitter, which means it has different characteristics in terms of the way that it affects the cancer cells. And it mostly relies on a starting material. An interesting thing about this supply chain, and if you go back to one of Lisa's slides there, you need to start with a inactive material, typically, right? An isotope, a starting isotope. And in the case of actinium-225, the best way to make it is actually with radium-226. And there are two constraints there. One is the availability of the starting isotope, and the other is the ability, again, to make a lot of actinium-225 at scale. So that's a challenge, but that's the challenge, frankly, for anything. Lutetium is well established, but one of the things that people don't remember is that that lutetium really started to be looked at more than a decade ago. You could argue even 15 years ago, people were starting to think about lutetium, and it's taken that long for the supply chain to get to where it is, right? So you have there's a whole raft of up and coming isotopes. There's a really great, if you want to go look, there's a company called Oppenheimer, not related to the guy who made the bomb, I don't think, that does market research, and they have a really great, it kind of like a concentric circle diagram that shows hundreds of clinical trials and which isotopes they're using and what the indications are and everything like that. And the challenge for all of the up and coming isotopes is all of the parts of the supply chain, right? It's everything we've talked about here. It's the starting material, it's the radiation capacity, it's quality, it's logistics to get finished product. So there are tons of challenges across the board. And of course, that will change over time as more people start to produce the isotopes. And you will end up in a situation like we are with lutetium currently, where it's much less of a challenge.
I'd like to jump into to Richard's too, if that's okay.
Sure.
Perfect. No, I think Richard, you hit it right on the head with actinium-225. And one of the interesting things, especially that we're seeing, is you need the production to kind of help fuel the clinical trials. So when you're able to have the clinical trials, then that kind of goes down further in the delivery pipeline to get these radiopharmaceuticals and therapies approved by Health Canada for use, which then Ontario's Canadians and patients around the world are able to use. So when we're seeing a high demand of like upcoming ones like actinium-225, it's important to have the production to support the demand for these clinical trials and research to help take it the next step in the next generation of radiopharmaceuticals. There is a lot of work also happening in Ontario. So there's a company called Actinier that is looking to help kind of push this actinium-225 production further. And CNL is doing a lot of work in collaboration with them, as well as a cyclotron facility out in Saskatchewan to use radium as well to produce actinium-225. I think also it's important to talk about the emerging ones, but also to talk about the isotopes that are well established, because those still also need support from a production side. And as Lisa kind of mentioned today, Laurentis is kind of putting Canada back on the map for those important isotopes, for instance, with molybdenum-99. So if you take a step back to Canada's historical leadership, we historically were one of the world's leading producers of molybdenum-99 through our CNL reactors there. And once those shut down, the world's noticed, wow, a huge hit has happened for this critical isotope that is used for a lot of diagnostic therapy, diagnostic uses. But Laurentis is helping with the Arcandu reactors to reestablish that supply and leadership as well. But Lisa, I'll leave that to you, but I thought that was a great note to add.
Yeah, no, good point. Nothing to add. We're very proud to bring moly back to Canada. It is the most commonly used isotope in the world, and there was a large impact when the NRU reactor went down and stopped making it. So other research reactors sort of cobbled together a schedule around the world, and so reactors as far away as South Africa, Australia are part of the network of reactors that are producing moly. And when any one of them goes down, the nuclear medicine departments actually get notifications that there might be shortages of that important isotope and more realistically the decayed daughter technetia, and the impacts of that are quite profound. So once we have that back in Canada at scale, we'll be part of the solution to ensure that it has continuity and reliability.
I also see William's hand is up.
Wilson.
Oh, sorry, Wilson.
That's okay. So I think a prime example of medical need versus logistics versus operationally being able to use medical isotopes would be, say, rubidium for cardiac PET scanning. So I think in the medical community, this specific rubidium cardiac PET scan is kind of seen as the gold standard for cardiac imaging in terms of molecular imaging, but actually being able to perform it is very, very difficult because rubidium 82 is has a half-life of, like, I don't know, a minute, 2 minutes or something like that. So by the time you produce it and walk it down the hall, it's already half-life decayed. So not very many sites are able to even offer rubidium cardiac PET. And I think mostly it would be large academic centers who would be able to afford purchasing such generators. And then you have to do like a business case scenario of, okay, you're going to spend X amount of money to buy this generator. How many rubidium scans are you going to get out of it? And how much can you logistically do with it versus not being able to offer it at all?
Thank you so much. Our next question is, are there certain isotopes and or target combinations that are being focused on the most for theranostics? And if so, why? For example, the lutetium isotope mentioned combined with certain cancers, etc.
Maybe I'll start. I think Richard already covered actinium. That is definitely a hot, pun intended, isotope that has a lot of R&D activity right now. Beyond that, terbium-161, lead-212, astatine-211, and I think coppers are all sort of being investigated at various stages of the clinical development process. And even I would say lutetium itself is still there. If you look at the number of clinical trials ongoing, I think lutetium still actually has the most number of trials. So beyond usage initially in prostate cancer, advanced prostate cancer, and neuroendocrine tumors. It is being researched in other tumor types. So there's a lot of exciting activity. I think that the question also gets into combinations. Maybe not exactly what you mean, but use of lutetium paired with chemotherapies and other sort of modalities are being explored as well. So to really be aggressive with treating cancers. So there's a lot of innovation and exciting things happening that really, drive that theranostic surge that I think both Amanda and I showed in our respective slides.
Yeah, I think I'll just add on to Lisa's point. If you think about technetium, it's one radioisotope that we use for many, many, many things, depending on how it is that we're reconstituting a kit or whatever it is. It could be used for bone imaging, it could be used for cardiac imaging, it could be used for a lot of different things. So I think we're just beginning to start to scratch the surface of what we can tag lutetium with. So as mentioned, prostate imaging is kind of the biggest thing that people associate lutetium with, but lutetium dotatate for neuroendocrine scanning is something that the ministry is also looking into as well in the future. But even just looking at, say, FDG, which is the radioactive sugar, so there's different things that we can do with FDG as well. So not every site in Ontario, not every PET center in Ontario is performing, say, cardiac FDG scanning. So regular oncology FDG scanning versus cardiac FDG scanning, it's the same isotope, but we're using it in a different way. So there's still a lot of things that I think we can do with our existing isotopes.
Thank you so much. We will move on to our last question. And for all other remaining questions, we will send out an email after this webinar where everyone can send their questions to. So for our last question, are any additional accreditations recommended to pursue medical isotope work? Asking as approximately 4-year experienced nuclear energy rad-based engineer.
Interesting. So I don't know about accreditations. I would say general skill areas. I might say or at least I can point to shortages in the space, right? So radiochemistry is one of those. So if you have a degree in radiochemistry, you are highly sought after these days because they're few and far between. And the other area I would point to would be RP, radiation protection, right? So you've got this really interesting combination of the sort of the FDA regulated part of the healthcare component of the drug, and then the whole RP thing, because now all of a sudden you're dealing with, and healthcare supply chains aren't really set up, right? Like guys like Wilson, he has to have knowledge on both of those sides, right? You have to have knowledge about how to use the drugs effectively, but also keep both the patient and the people administering it safe, right? So how do you make sure that whoever's administering your dose of whatever it is not getting a dose at the same time, right? So a lot of that health physics, RP stuff. I think radiochemistry is really important. There's a whole wide array, I would say, things like transportation logistics. People totally underestimate how much time and energy it takes into getting these melting ice cubes shipped around the world, right? Cobalt has a 5-year half-life, not as critical for us. But if you have to stick something on an airplane and it's got to get there, and if you have something like TheraSphere that's literally the dose has the guy or girl's name on it, right? And they're waiting in a hospital, and that dose needs to get to the hospital and get administered. And if the flight gets canceled or something happens, they're not going to get their treatment, right? So there's all of these, beyond the sort of the basic science and engineering. In my mind, there's tons and tons of opportunity around the supply chain to add skill there. So that didn't answer your question. I'm sorry, I can't give you an accreditation to go and get, but those are my ideas about where it would be good to at least take some interest and study up a bit.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all the speakers for answering our questions and sharing your insights. If you are interested in learning more about nuclear isotopes, stay tuned for our upcoming Lunch and Learns, where we will get more into depth about each of the topics covered today. For more NAYGN related events, we have few upcoming events like the NWMO Demonstration Facility Tour on July 24th, International Youth Day Speed Networking on August 4th, and Take Your Parents to Work Day on August 21st. Please feel free to sign up for these events. I'll now hand over the presentation to Amanda for closing remarks. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Well, thank you to NAYGN and the CEOIA team for today's Lunch and Learn. I think it was fantastic. And as NAYGN noted, we look forward to collaborating further with you folks. And if there's particular topic areas that the community is interested in from today's presentation, we're happy to dive in deeper. And the QR codes to please scan and keep in the loop on what's happening in this exciting industry. Well, thank you, everyone. Hope everyone has a good lunch. We learned and now we lunch.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.